Good morning, everybody, to the Monday, August 27th, Des Moines City Council workshop. This morning, we're going to start out by discussing the 4-mile watershed report and recommendation. Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, council members, we have a presentation prepared on that. Jeb, do you want to pick it off?
Mayor, members of council, Jeb Brewer, city engineer. This morning we have a brief presentation by Snyder and Associates regarding a proposal that will be on the agenda tonight for establishment of a 4-mile creek watershed. As you may remember, a couple years ago we've had some additional flooding in the 4-mile area, and there was a joint study with Polk County, City of Des Moines, Pleasant Hill to study the flooding along the 4-mile corridor. Snyder & Associates was the consultant hired by the county to do that. We've gotten to the point where we've had some numerous meetings with in the area about the flooding and what are the levels of flooding, what would be anticipated for future flooding. Soon the study will enter into the phase where there'll be times to start looking at solutions, and those solutions will be in different jurisdictions. And this Watershed Management Authority is an idea that's come up as something that would be beneficial to help coordinate those projects. With that, I'll introduce Mark Land from Snyder & Associates to present the idea.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning to talk to you a little bit about the 4-Mile Creek Watershed Management Authority. Thank you. I'll just be my own technical person here. Basically what I want to do is start out with just a little bit about what is the Watershed Management Authority. In a nutshell, after the floods of 2008, the state of Iowa recognized that the flooding that occurred could not be solved by jurisdiction, and so we needed watershed-based solutions to try to solve this flooding. If you kind of recognize some of the flooding, like Des Moines had, Cedar Rapids had, those kind of things, that can't be solved by, just by the city of Des Moines by themselves. And so the legislature created this watershed management authorities, and with this idea of let's try to figure out how we can get all these jurisdictions to work together. Must be made up of 2 or more cities, counties, or soil and water conservation districts within the watershed. Obviously, there's many other groups that might be interested in a watershed management authority, but the legislation specifically only allows those members of those 3 groups to be involved in the watershed management authority. But then you must invite all of those jurisdictions to participate. So you might ask yourself, well, why should we participate in this? Well, the most obvious one, and the one that the state wanted everyone to recognize, was the flooding problems and trying to find solutions to those. The intent of this legislation was to develop this coordination that I spoke about, and that in the future they had talked about potential funding that would be provided to help facilitate this. And in fact, the state has already created some levels of funding. There's actually a grant out right now that is due at the end of September that would provide additional money for planning in the watershed that the groups have talked about applying for. And so that's already right off the bat something and you could only do it if you were a member of a watershed management authority. There's no upfront cost to join. In fact, the future costs, the way our 28E has been written, would only be, any future costs would only be allowed if it came back to this council or any, the board, et cetera, to provide that funding. That group cannot create their own funding without the approval of each, the appropriate city council or board of supervisors. So how is this established? In effect, the 28E agreement has been developed and transmitted to the jurisdictions. The jurisdictions would approve that, and then at that time they would nominate. Oops. Oh man, I knew I did something wrong. At that time they would nominate the individual that would, be their representative on this board. So I think sorry about that. in there somewhere. Oh, wrong one. Ah, there. Thank you. Let's skip ahead here. So at that point, you would have your own representative, and the way it's written right now is each jurisdiction would have one representative on this authority. And then these representatives would get together and create the bylaws that would, you know, tell them how this group would operate. I would say the way the 2080 is written right now, even though it's kind of called a watershed management authority, and the legislation probably gives the ability to have, for this group to have a lot more authority than what is written, you know, in the 2080 right now. After discussions with the various jurisdictions, pretty much the way that it's written is there's really not much authority within this group right now, with the idea that everybody would be able to get together and kind of figure out the process and really focus more on education and maybe grant funding and things of that nature. But it would always be able to come back to the city council for any type of funding. So here's kind of a listing. I won't read through each and every one of these, but kind of gives you an idea of what those duties would be, and this is specifically right out of the legislation. And many of these, as Jeb mentioned, we've already started on with the study between Pleasant Hill, Ankeny, Polk County, and the city of Des Moines, as far as the assessment part of it. And then they did have a specific item in there about not acquiring project or property by eminent domain. But they also specifically mentioned the desire to coordinate with other agencies. And I wouldn't necessarily limit it just to these, but the idea is to try to be inclusive in those discussions with state agencies. So who would you be in the 2080 with? Should everyone approve it? Here's the little watershed drawing. As far as the dark black outlines the entire watershed. And you can actually see it does go all the way up to Boone and Story County. And there's the list of the jurisdictions that would be involved. To date, the city of Slater, Ankeny, Pleasant Hill, the Polk Soil and Water, Story Soil and Water, and Boone Soil and Water have all approved the 2080 agreement. And we have, you know, the rest of the meetings in place for the other councils and boards to consider the 2080, with the idea that, as I mentioned, that grant application was the 24th of September, I believe. So with the idea that we would try to get the 2080 recorded so it can be established in time for us to apply for that grant by the 24th of September. So I know that was kind of a quick overview, but I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you might have that I didn't cover, or anything that jumps out at you.
A couple of questions for
Sure.
you. The representatives that would be appointed to the board, the authority, are they expected to be elected officials, or can they be citizens that fulfill certain requirements?
Sure, absolutely. That's a good question. We recently completed the similar type thing for Squaw Creek watershed and Story and Boone County. In those jurisdictions, it was kind of a range. It can be anybody that you want it to be. And that they appointed board of supervisors, council, but other jurisdictions had not necessarily elected officials. It can be whoever you would choose.
And this body has absolutely no taxing authority. It would just be an agreement as to dollars that they would contribute from general funds, other respective. Correct.
And it can only be, and the way this is written, it would probably need to be by separate agreement later to deal with any dollars. So you wouldn't, this does not specifically require you to have any funding. There would need to be another 2080 of some type between the jurisdictions should that come up as far as funding. The legislation, I think, would allow that taxing authority, but this 2080 does not have it written that way.
I know you've done some work with Brook Run on a study out there. Does the eastern part of this incorporate Brook Run into this 4-mile study?
The Brook Run area is included within the 4-mile watershed.
So, thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much.
All right. Our next subject for presentation is the historic preservation standards. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Phil Delafield has got this one, so Phil.
Thank you, Rick. Mayor and Council, Phil Delafield, Community Development Director. Actually, our staff is here today to present this information. You'll recall that back in early July, City Council asked for staff to review the historic district provisions regarding composite materials and the newer materials that are now entering the market. So staff has conducted this review, and I'll say a select committee has conducted this review. And we are here today to present the findings of that. So to that end, Mike Ledwig and Jason Van Essen are here to present the information. Mike is the planning administrator for the city, and Jason Van Essen is a senior planner who staffs the Historic District Commission, and I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Good morning. First, before I get started, I just want to, if I stumble along, I apologize. Monday morning's a tough morning. I only had 1 cup of coffee, so we'll get this started. But as Phil indicated, we were asked to look back over the local historic district design guidelines in the context of newer materials coming forward and kind of our current practice. To get us started kind of as a baseline through this process, we first looked at what allows us to have a preservation ordinance, a local district, establish the commissions to operate that, and that's the Iowa Code, Section 303. Just the other point of reference to this code section is that anytime we adopt the ordinance or amend the ordinance or propose a district, like when we recently had the Riverbend district come through, we have to process that through the state for their review. The Iowa Code also establishes the process for the Commission's power of review and also the appeal process and the consideration, what's supposed to be looked at, whether that appeal is heard by you or heard at district court. So Chapter 58 of the City Code is the preservation ordinance. Established the Commission. Establishes also the Landmark Review Board, which is a combination of the Urban Design Review Board and the Historic Preservation Commission. And those two things together, or those two bodies together, review alterations to the 20 or so landmarks that we have that are not inside a local district. The other thing to point out is that our code is certified, or it's in compliance with the Certified Local Government Program for the state, which I'll get to in a second here. The CLG program, we also wanted to look at this. It's not Iowa Code, but it's based on the National Historic Preservation Act. And basically, it's an agreement between the city and the state. It allows us access to grant programs, to technical assistance. A lot of the National Registered districts and studies that we've seen over the years have been partially funded by these grant programs, so it's been very beneficial to the city. The couple things to point out with regard to requirements is that we have to have a commission that oversees that program, and we also have to have a compliant ordinance. The next couple of slides are just kind of, I'm not going to read them, but just want to point out a couple of the other requirements of that program. We need to encourage the nominations to the National Register. We need to be committed to preservation. Also, we need to enforce state and local ordinances for the designation and protection of historic properties. This is just the timeline for, you can see that since about the early 80s, that's kind of when the preservation ordinance was adopted, and we started adding districts. This is the Owl's Head district. It was the first local district established south of Grand, 28th, 29th. The next year, Sherman Hill was established south of 235, east of MLK. Whoops, I apologize. And then earlier this year, we had the establishment of the Riverbend district. It doesn't quite match up with the neighborhood boundaries, but you can see that it's kind of an upside-down J on 9th Street along the river in Arlington and Oakland. July 9th is at that council hearing, you asked us, as Phil indicated, to look at our design guidelines, how we should use or look at synthetic materials. So to do so, we put together a committee. We wanted to have kind of a cross-section of people, so we had some staff members. We had Scott Allen from the Urban Design Review Board, licensed architect, also part of that Landmark Review Board. Paula Moore with the state architectural historian with the Preservation Office, and then Teresa Wiedemeyer with the Historic Preservation Commission. So we looked at our ordinance. The ordinance with regard to reviewing applications for a certificate of appropriateness references the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation and their guidelines. It also talks about the process of adopting local design guidelines, which is more of our focus. These criteria that we use obviously have to be adopted by council and then available for the public. So we got our committee. We looked at the ordinance. What is the criteria or the structure that we're supposed to work in for making decisions? The first place that points us to are the Secretary of Interior standards. There are 10 standards. They're fairly broad. Standard 6, I won't read it word for word here, but that kind of applies to what we've been asked to do. And I'll just paraphrase there, but it asks us to repair versus replace. And then in cases where our things are so deteriorated we must replace, that the new material should match the design, color, texture, and where possible, materials. The National Park Service has also created guidelines that are there to help you implement those broad standards. So we looked at those as well. They're more specific, but they're still not, they can't give you case by case, this is exactly what you need to do. There still needs to be an interpretation made based on that particular circumstance. So just how it's more of a decision-making process that they prioritize for you. One thing that's not specifically mentioned in our code, but it's very useful, are the preservation briefs that are put out by the National Park Service. There are 47 of these documents currently. They're a technical document. They're updated. They're added. New ones are added. So we reviewed those as well. The one that was in particular interest to us was number 16, titled "The Use of Substitute Materials on Historic Building Exteriors." And it states that substitute materials should be used only on a limited basis and only when they match the appearance and general properties of the historic material. It goes on, and I won't read this, but to say kind of the same things that the standards do, that standard number 6 with regard to craftsmanship, detail, color, texture, that those are the qualities you should look at when considering a replacement material. So we looked at the national level information, compared that to our design guidelines, which are really 3 documents put together for building and rehab, new construction, and fence guidelines. We thought that the next logical step was to review, well, what do we do now? What's our current process or practice? So one thing that we pointed out here is that currently the commission does look at all materials, whether they're natural or synthetic, to make sure that they're being utilized in an appropriate manner. A good example, wood or stone are both natural products, and wood historically in cases have been used to replicate stone, and so that might be a case where we'd look at that to make sure if that's being proposed that makes sense in this case. So currently it is a case-by-case process. The commission, through our staff reports, through the discussion at the commission's motions, we do compare the proposals, whether it's a natural product, whether it's wood for wood or stone for stone, brick for brick. Brick is a great example where historic brick versus modern brick often don't have the same dimensions or colors or textures, so we look at those carefully to compare and make sure that their composition is similar, their designs, their dimension, the durability, color, texture, and other visual qualities are the same. So like I said, it could be brick for brick, and we're still doing that detailed review. We wanted to give you a couple examples of synthetic materials that we're seeing a lot and approving a lot on a frequent basis. And that the first picture there is cement fiberboard. It's allowed frequentally for new construction. See it often on new garages or additions. It's also been used on historic structures where cover-up siding, depression brick type of material has been removed, and there really is that historic lap siding left. the commission has allowed, in cases like that, for that to be used on a historic structure where you're not working with any existing materials. It has that same density and durability as wood, and then also the other two things that we've seen frequently are synthetic slate and then the tile roofing example as well. Same thing there, very durable products, 50-year lifespan, very similar in appearance. More recently, we had a request to use a polymer column. It's a synthetic product. It's stone and marble and a resin mixed together. It was used for the reconstruction of a large-scale porch. So here's, this project is actually underway currently, the Port Well and Wells Port, Woodland and 19th Street. This is the building about a year ago prior to construction. And here's a recent picture. You can see that they're reconstructing that front porch based off the original architectural drawings. You can see the columns in use. So our group's observations, you know, we looked at the federal level information, we looked at what our practice is, what our guidelines say, and we also, part of this discussion, you know, the sustainability came up in our group discussion, and we just wanted to, you know, take that into consideration that, you know, you can't always reuse the historic material, but when you are able to, that is a sustainable practice. It's existing material, it's already been produced and shipped, you're not paying to transport it, you're not putting fuel in the truck to drive it. It's old growth lumber if we are talking about wood, which I won't go into, we could do a long presentation on just that, but it's a more durable product, it's resistant to, more resistant to rot, and less material goes into the landfill. The other part of that being sustainable is, you know, often when we review these, we're reviewing them in the context of making a building energy efficient. And there are many ways to do so. The group noted that there's some ways that are less impactful on the historic resources than others, and that's what this slide is just there to illustrate. So, things such as insulation, weather stripping, caulking, heavy drapes, storm windows, those things can make a big difference. And this is an illustration from the U.S. Department of Energy. You can see, the only thing I'll really point out is that this indicates that floors, walls, and ceilings are where our greatest loss of areas, heat transfer. And so you can, insulation is something that can be done to address that and have minimal impact. So after a couple of meetings with our group and looking through all this information, we found that we believe that the guidelines are in line with the Secretary of Interior standards and their guidelines. Also with the National Park Service preservation briefs. Right now, all materials are considered on a case-by-case nature. Decisions on new and replacement materials are based on comparable composition, matching design, dimensions, durability, color, texture, other visual qualities. The other thing we wanted, I don't want to miss this point, is that we do need to have, whatever we end up with our guidelines, we need to have broad language that allows for the evolution of materials. You know, cement board is a relatively new product that's come into use in the commission or in the districts, and so we want to make sure that we maintain that flexibility. So I've listed out these qualities of dimension and those sorts of things. So we wanted to give you a couple examples of recent cases that have been before you and how this criteria compares to those materials, and what this is kind of what the commission was thinking, you know, when they were making their decision, the staff was making their recommendation. So recently we had a proposal for the vinyl deck railing in River Bend. And in that case, you know, if you go down through our criteria, this composition is not comparable to a wood product, which is, you know, typical of a porch or a deck. It's hollow. It is designed to have the same kind of physical shape or appearance, so we would say its design is similar, its dimensions are similar. It's not a durable product. At the commission meeting, it was discussed about how if it's cold, you know, we had some commissioners that have had that product, they've used it, and it doesn't survive winter all that well. It was white, but it's very highly reflective, as you know most plastics are. It had that very smooth plastic texture to it. And just its overall visual properties, we didn't feel that it matched up with a traditional wood product. The other one that we're familiar with is the proposed vinyl windows. So this is kind of, you look at this criteria, its composition is not the same as a wood window. Its design, shapes, and dimensions are not the same. Vinyl windows, you know, a historic wood window with the old growth lumber will last a long time, or a wood window replacement window. Durability, we had some questions about that. I see we have an example here that isn't white, but what's been proposed and installed was white. The texture wasn't the same, the visual properties were not the same.
Definition of durability, is that, I know at one point we were talking about 50 years on the roof.
Sure. As I understand it, most vinyl windows have a warranty or lifespan about 20 years, and that they actually start failing prior to that. We've had a lot of people talk about examples of replacement windows they've had to replace. And we actually, you know, we're trying to keep this presentation broad and look at all materials, but really, I mean, we could talk, there's so much information out there about windows that we could just do.
No, I'm not just saying for windows, but your definition, what is the time that you attach to durability? Is it 10 years, 15 years, 50 years? For any product?
Sure, for any product.
Right.
It's case by case, but with a vinyl window, the information that we have is they're about 20 years, and that they start, you know, losing their seal sooner than that. The other products, the durability with regard to like that deck example came in more of information we had about how that product reacts during cold, you know, weather, you know, getting hit and those different things. We didn't really discuss the lifespan of, you know, like what the manufacturer says, you know, it's got this XY, you know, lifespan. It was more of personal experience. But I do want to point out that you don't have to hit all this criteria. It's a matter of putting it all together and making a group decision. And so there may be cases where, you know, you might build up, whether it's texture, durability, those different things. It's not an absolute. It's just part of that whole discussion. And one thing that we will do when we move forward regardless is to make sure that we start having this information early on, so when things do come to you, you can see how that criteria stacks up. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. Okay. Just to show you the cement fiberboard, we feel that that meets, I mean, it has that same density, dimensions, and design as a wood product. So we just wanted to show that and how that's looked at by the commission. So our subgroup, our working committee, have a few recommendations. One being that we think the design guidelines that we have are sound. We don't believe there should be any significant changes to them. We would like to make some updates to them. There's new preservation briefs that have been developed and amended. So we see that as an opportunity. This is an opportunity to enhance reference to those and utilize those better than we do. There is an outdated building code reference. We'd also like to add some information or a paragraph or two about the Riverbend District. The last thing that, kind of the bigger thing that we think we should do is to add a statement that talks about this criteria that I'd kind of gone over here about composition, design, dimensions, and those sorts of things. So we put that in the document. We verbalize this criteria a lot, and we try to incorporate in the staff reports and the commission's motions, but we feel that this is an opportunity to put that in the guidelines so when people are looking at that and making their decisions on their projects, that they have that before them before they do make that decision. So thank you for your patience. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Mayor.
Skip?
Jason, at the end, under committee's recommendations, you said that we, as in the committee, feel there shouldn't be any changes to the guidelines. When you say we, was it consensus throughout the committee?
Yes, and just minimal changes. We are recommending minimal changes. But.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody have anything else? Christine?
So what's the process from here? As we go forward, are you going to have additional opportunities for public input on this, or, I mean,
if we get positive feedback that, you'd like us to implement some changes, we'll have to go through the public hearing process, notify the neighborhoods, have the proposed amendments or changes to the commission, and then they'll come back to you and then sent to the state for their review as well. So there would be some public process left to do.
Two things. First, specifically, it says in the recommended paragraph, maybe if we can go back. So I think that's your last screen. The new material should have a comparable composition, blah, blah, blah. But if you go back about 4 screens, 2, 3, one to the vinyl windows. Those are the same words that you use in the last paragraph, and here you're saying no. They don't. So have we gone from a case-by-case basis to saying vinyl windows are not appropriate? I mean, is this a roundabout way of just doing that?
No, what we're saying, this is specific to the example that you'd seen before. Right now, we have not seen a vinyl window product that would meet our criteria. That's not to say that there won't be improvements and advancement down the road. But the product that was specific to this case that the commission reviewed and that we visited that site, that's how it compares to this criteria.
And you don't know of a window that's vinyl or?
I have not seen one at this point.
Meets it.
It doesn't mean that it wouldn't happen at some point, someday. And that's the whole point where we want to be broad with these guidelines to allow for advancements to be made, new materials that we're not even thinking about currently. All these composites are something that 10, 15 years ago, nobody had seen. So this process allows for change to happen, for that to be reviewed equally over time.
Mm-hmm. The other question, and this is what's always troubled me in the balance between protecting the neighborhoods and making sure that a lot of our neighborhoods are filled with people that don't have resources to do an A+ job or the job that their neighbors would like them to do. It's just a fact of the income levels of a lot of our neighbors. But in the 35 screens that you showed us, I didn't see anything that addressed the affordability or making any scale of being rational to the value of a property, or there was nothing there about whether or not these kinds of expenses that the city would thrust onto somebody is worth it, or what the measurement is for that. Is your sense that the commission or the committee disregards that if you can't afford it, you can't fix up your house?
That's far from the truth. We work very closely with property owners. Just earlier, late last week, I went on site with a property owner to help them look at their building, go through kind of a decision-making process about how they can do this. We offer technical assistance, and actually there's many times that the commissioners, on a completely volunteer basis, will go show people how to do things, repair what they got, because that's always the cheapest, is to repair the existing material and maintain it. So we work really hard to try to address those concerns with people, make their projects successful, and also, to fit kind of within the criteria of what, we're supposed to look at.
Can you go back to the vinyl and let's eliminate windows? So we're saying that vinyl, period, is problematic and not going to be a part of the historic district.
These two vinyl products are problematic. PVC by itself is not, the way it's produced and how it's manufactured doesn't lend it to meeting with these criteria. There are these composite materials that I showed you that have, like those columns, that has a resin in it that's similar to it's a plastic resin, but it's mixed in with other products that give it that durability, stability, and design. So I don't want to just single out vinyl because it can be that kind of plastic material can be incorporated in other ways to make it work.
Other questions? Jason, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We might, does the council want to go on, or should we get some comments on this? I think there may be some people that want to give us some input.
I'd allow input right now.
All right. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to give us some input on this presentation at this time? We're asking for any public input.
Matt McKinney, on behalf of Conlon Properties. My address is 666 Grand Avenue, Suite 2000 here in Des Moines, Iowa. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, just a couple things that I'd like to follow up. I understand we're here to discuss some of the guidelines to consider when determining what sort of materials to use in the historic districts here in Des Moines. And somewhat of an emphasis, because of where this came from, on the materials used for windows. Based upon my experience before the Historic Preservation Commission over now roughly the last 10 months, there's a couple of things that I'd like to point out, some of which were not addressed here in the presentation by Mr. Van Essen. So first, I'd like to focus on one of the things that Mr. Coleman had indicated is the cost. Throughout the entire presentation this morning, I didn't see anything about cost. And I understand Mr. Van Essen said it's something that should be considered, but I think what's important is that when I was before the Historic Preservation Commission, I was blatantly told that cost is not in our purview. And so I think it's important that to the extent we're going to talk about what the guidelines should be, that those guidelines contain a specific provision that talk about the economics of various proposals. Because right now, as it stands, and when I was before them, the commission told me blatantly we don't consider cost. And so I think it's important that that be expressly identified in the guidelines. I think also that is consistent with the National Park Service standards. One of those, the guidelines under the City of Des Moines, they talk about how the National Park Service standards for rehabilitation and guidelines for rehabilitating historic buildings are things that should be considered. If you take a look at the standards, those specific standards indicate that the economic and technical feasibility of proposals should be considered. And I'd also like to point out, I don't know if this will come on here. So I've got here the standards for rehabilitation. These are specifically referenced currently in the Des Moines guidelines. I've highlighted a portion down here. It says, new features will match the old design, color, texture, and where possible materials. So there's no specific requirement. It doesn't say it shall match materials. The proposal that I saw today said it should match materials. Right now, the National Park Service own guidelines say it doesn't need to match materials, or I think, as we saw in the presentation today, it was a composition or comparable composition. So I'd just like to point that out. Along those same lines, in addition to the standards, we also have guidelines put out by the National Park Service. This is a copy of those guidelines. Those guidelines indicate that, like the guidance for repair, the preferred option is always replacement of the entire feature in kind. That is with the same material. However, because this approach may not always be technically or economically feasible, provisions are made to consider the use of compatible substitute material. And again, I just emphasize that these are the Park Service guidelines, and they specifically talk about considering the economics of a proposal, and also that substitute material, not the same material, would be permissible. I'm not going to go through all of these things, but the Secretary of Standards, they have an illustrated guideline. These guidelines are similar to the other things we've talked about, where they specifically talk about looking at the technical and economic feasibility of a proposal. I would point out that the preservation brief, we talked, Mr. Van Essen pointed out different things on how the National Park Service put out preservation briefs. This is preservation brief number 8. And I think what's important, we've talked a little bit about vinyl today. The preservation brief specifically states that vinyl is allowed in historic districts, and not only just on windows, which you may have a couple inches worth of vinyl around the framing. But this specific preservation brief permits vinyl on the entire siding of a building. And so I don't think that we should have any blanket prohibition with respect to the use of vinyl. And as Mr. Van Essen pointed out, allowing a broad sort of case-by-case language where you could take into consideration new materials, I think would be appropriate as opposed to a complete prohibition. And again, I think this is important because when I was before the Preservation Commission, I was repeatedly told that vinyl is not accepted in Sherman Hills. It was just a blank statement. So it didn't matter what the composition was, what the cost was. It was just, if you have vinyl, we're looking the other way, and it's a no. So I think looking at...
And I see the date on this is July 9th of this year, so...
Well, this is when I printed it off.
Oh.
I believe this was from... I can get the specific date if that's important. I can get the specific date and provide that. So again, I just reiterate that the National Park Service has indicated that economics should be considered. I think it's reasonable, especially considering what's going to be imposed upon the citizens of this city of Des Moines, that cost should be considered when talking about maintenance and repairs. This is an example here out of Tacoma, Washington, where an individual had sought to use vinyl instead of wood. Goes before the commission and they approve vinyl instead of wood because of the cost that's associated with it. So it's not something unique. It is being applied across the country. Second, I think it's just, if I may have a couple more minutes.
Council? Okay.
Thank you. Second, I think it's important to consider energy efficiency. It's currently in the guidelines. This proposed guideline, I didn't see anything with respect to considering energy efficiency. I think it should remain in there. I think it's important to consider energy efficiency, especially when you're doing routine and substantial repairs and maintenance on any sort of structure. So I think to remove that sort of language would be something that would be not in the best interest of the city of Des Moines. And then we talked about, well, the proposal here. Let me just draw attention to that. The proposal, I don't know if we can go back to that. Okay. Deteriorated architectural features. Currently, one of the important things that's outlined in the City of Des Moines guidelines is it has to be a historical feature, not just any feature. And so I think if we're talking about amending what the requirements are, rather than deteriorated architectural features, I think it'd be important to put in there that it needs to be a historical feature, not just any feature in a building. I think that's one important thing. Second, comparable composition. To me, there's simply no basis when you look at the National Park Service requirements that require comparable composition. All that they require is that it be essentially similar in the overall appearance. Second, or the third point here is durability. What is durability? Maybe a window lasts for 20 years, maybe a window lasts for 50 years. The point is, while it's in there, what's the best material that's going to be there? I think that's one of the key considerations. And so when we're talking about what does durability mean, does that mean how long it lasts or how strong is it while it's there? Because once it's deteriorated, whether it's wood, vinyl, or otherwise, it's going to be replaced anyway. So I think the emphasis should be on, while something's in there, how strong is it? The fourth point is color is now in here. Currently under the Des Moines guidelines, color is not a consideration when it comes to historical requirements. And specifically, right now the Des Moines Code says, for the purpose of this article, changes in the type and design of storm windows and in the color of the outer surfaces of structures are considered to be ordinary maintenance and repair. This is what I would consider to be a significant change, because now anytime there's going to be a color change, that person needs to apply for a certificate of appropriateness, whereas before, if there was a color change, he didn't need to apply for a certificate of appropriateness. So those are just a few points that I'd like to make today, and if you guys have any questions that I can answer or provide any information, certainly be willing to do so.
Does anybody have any questions? Ellie?
Thank you.
Anybody?
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Jack Porter, 815 18th Street, Des Moines. Mayor, members of the council, I'll just take a brief opportunity to address a couple of issues that I think are important. Part of my job with the State Historic Society is to review and historic tax credit applications, both state and federal. In doing that, I attend training by the National Park Service, and most of that training is how to interpret and apply the Secretary of Interior standards, which is what we use to evaluate work and projects that are applying for historic tax credits, and also our grants program. A couple of things for the committee. One, I think the staff should be complimented and the council thanked for having this workshop. It's a difficult situation in front of you, but the presentation and the topic is very important, especially to the historic districts in our community. I don't have the facts today to back it up, but I'd ask the city manager to take a look at the assessed value of Owl's Head and Sherman Hill since the 1960s. The last time I looked at it, those two neighborhoods are one of the few parts of this city that increased value every 10 years since then. And part of that has, we feel, because of designation as historic districts. The greatest value to property is to maintain their historic integrity. That's what keeps their values high. And I think in Sherman Hill and Owl's Head, you'll find that most of the investments, whether it's siding, wooding, painting, just general maintenance, whatever it is, you'll find that the assessed value continues to increase. The use of alternative materials is tough. There's no doubt about it. But one of the things that we would, and we do apply at the state when we're evaluating work, is where is that alternative material going to be applied? Is it going to be on the front facade, or is it going to be around the entry, or is it in a new addition, or is it in the back? Is it on the first floor? Is it in the side where it can't be seen? Or is it on the 8th floor where visually if you're standing on the sidewalk you can't tell what kind of material it is? Is it in the front lobby, or is it in a back 3rd floor bathroom? We do apply a standard that says where you can see it and you have the greatest visual impact of historic structure, that's where the highest standards are applied. Where the public generally does not see it, or whether it's because of the distance from the sidewalk or in the 3rd floor of a private residence, then that application is less stringent. It is also, is it a character-defining feature? Is it a window? Is it historic oak trim? Is it original, or is it a substitute material that was put in the 50s, 60s, or 70s? The intent of the Historic Commission and the rules that they apply and the Secretary of Interior standards is try to retain and maintain as much original historic fabric, features, and finishes. That's the basis of all the standards, is try to maintain that integrity of these historic resources. We also know that old growth wood, and I think that was part of the slides, especially in wood windows and that sort of thing, yeah, they do rot, but usually it's because of lack of maintenance or poor maintenance or inappropriate maintenance. But once historic features like old growth wood windows are maintained, they can be made energy efficient in lots of different ways. My final point is that we currently are getting calls from schools, courthouses, residents around the state who back in the 1980s when they replaced their aluminum or the historic windows with aluminum, back then, the aluminum windows are now failing. And I remember walking on a tour with Sister Stella Neal not too long ago before she passed away, looking at several properties here in Des Moines. And one of them, she wanted to have our comments about replacing the original historic windows that needed repair with vinyl. And we said, you shouldn't do that. You should just take the time and the energy and the labor and repair those windows and weather strip them. She said, well, we can't afford it. We have these short-term costs. And I said, well, you need to look at the long-term cost of these projects. And then the next apartment building we went to, and she said, oh, by the way, all of these vinyl windows need to be replaced because they were put in about 20 to 30 years ago, and now they've all warped and need to be replaced. So there is short-term cost considerations, but there's also long-term benefit when historic fabric and features are retained and made. Most of the labor is in labor costs to retain historic fixture, whether it's stripping the paint, glazing them, buying glass, whatever it is, installing weather stripping. Where vinyl windows, who knows where they're made at. Some are, of course, made locally, but most aren't. And so we're losing our local historic fabric, and we're shipping out our dollars to China or wherever to have vinyl windows put in. And so we would encourage you to give the Historic District Commission that latitude and that understanding. And finally, I would say one of the things you need to look at when you approve, especially things like vinyl siding and aluminum siding, look at the damage that can be caused underneath. The long-term rot and damage of buildings can be substantial. And yeah, it looks good for a while. But after 50, 60, 70, 80, whatever that time frame is, 150 years, it's best to keep as much original material as possible. Thank you.
Jim Conlon, 2900 Southern Hill Circle. Just a couple of different comments. I understand now that a church in the Sherman Hill area, not in the district, has replaced all of its windows with vinyl windows because of cost. There's no question but what the product that we offer is structurally superior and less cost. Also, the utilities were mentioned on the 826 property we've been talking about. We have installed a new energy efficient boiler, a new energy efficient water heater, and 3 of the 7 apartments now have vinyl windows, and our energy cost has come from 37% of gross income to 11%. We hope to continue that. And my last comment is, earlier on the watershed, I do appreciate all of your efforts in that area. As you recall, we have a property over on East Douglas that incurred the most significant damage of $1.1 million in this 2008 flood. We did not request, nor did we receive, 1 penny of public support to repair that. Hopefully it will not happen again. Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, we appreciate everybody's comments this morning, and I think that we will hear this further this evening. Let's move on to the presentation on waterfront lodging, the design update. Yes.
But what we just discussed is not on the agenda tonight.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's true.
Just want to make sure.
As was just pointed out, the historic preservation standards will not be on tonight's agenda.
Mr. Mayor, you've already, as you know, approved the contract for the waterfront lodging project that's already under construction. They are here today to ask your review and update on the final design of the building, and with that, I'm going to turn it to Rita Connor.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. City Manager. Rita Connor with the Office of Economic Development. As the City Manager indicated, this has been approved by the council to move forward. We last saw the project in February of this year, and at that time, we were looking at a very different set of opportunities for the site. What has occurred in the interim period here is some challenges that we're trying to turn into the ability to make a better end product for the community. During the construction bidding phase in the spring, what the contractor recognized after closely working with our staff during the design detail process that this council set us on, looking at architectural thin brick as an exterior material for the buildings. In that dialogue and in the work that was done, it really became apparent that that was not the path that was going to be the most cost-effective or appropriate for the project. And in addition, looking at the bids that came in for the entire body of work to be conducted on the site, it was not going to be cost-effective to continue down the design path in a big picture sense with how the buildings were laid out on the site and so forth. The last piece of information that came to the developer was recognizing that a lot of over-excavation and additional fill was going to be needed on the site. That's always a bad surprise to find in the field. Several $100,000 later, going back through staff processes and back through Urban Design Review Board, we think that we have something that is cost-effective and also, I'm going to say, a dramatic improvement to urban design to come in and be a feature on the Des Moines riverfront. This is kind of an example of where we currently are with the approved plan that the council looked at in February. The site layout has Vine Street on the north, Market on the south, the riverfront with Water Street on the east, and 2nd Avenue on the west. The site depictions that we're going to use this morning are very general and just meant to kind of introduce what we see in the reconfiguration of the buildings that the developer's proposing today. What we had previously was all along the length of 2nd Avenue was the parking garage, but it also took up quite a bit of frontage on Vine Street at the north end. So it was essentially sharing space with the long-term extended stay product, which has been identified as a residence inn. What we felt had been achieved here was good in terms of how the site was extremely dense. We had several products. We had no surface parking, which had been part of the original design. So we felt that this was a successful configuration of buildings, but we'll take a look at how it's been reconfigured today. The work that the developer's done, again, we've got Vine Street on the north and looking at Market Street on the south. What's been the most influential change in terms of how the site has been activated at the street level is a combination of two things. What we previously saw was probably more dedicated space to internal activity in the courtyard area, in that center area in between the buildings. And what staff and our Urban Design Review Board continued to articulate was how can we provide more opportunities for the public, the walking public, the neighbors, to feel like it's an activated space and not a closed space to them. We think that this example achieves it. The second most influential thing is the residence inn flipping over and extending to run the block face of Vine Street. So you now have an entrance at the north end, which we feel gives that a focal point essentially and allows for a good ability to have kind of a different experience for the pedestrian and for the adjacent neighbors than what we saw before. Parking garage is still running along 2nd Avenue, but it has been tucked back to allow that block face of Vine to be taken up with the residents in. The Hampton Inn and Suites is in the southeast corner in largely the same configuration. But what we see here in terms of urban design, we think is a more successful product than what was laid out before. It also takes the height of the residence in from 7 stories down to 5. We're very interested in the context of the neighborhood and how the buildings relate to one another, especially with what's already there. So we think that's been an improvement. And then also we'll see an increase in the number of rooms overall in the residence inn, which is, an economic benefit, we think, to the development and to the city. This is the building that we looked at before. This is the building in the approved council plan from February. And we absolutely felt that this was a good product. We felt that there'd been a lot of success with what was demonstrated here with the mix of materials. And we did take a hard look at architectural thin brick. I listened pretty closely to Jason Van Essen and the others as we talk about new materials coming into the market and how we use those and how we evaluate their durability and so forth. And we very much did do that exercise. So we were very satisfied with the elevation at the time. And this was the previous exterior elevation for the residence in the extended stay product on the north. This gives us kind of a border-to-border view of what you'll see as somebody going by the property, as somebody living by the property, as somebody coming to the city to experience Des Moines through staying at one of these facilities. So what we've achieved, I think, is a product that lays out in a more creative way. In addition to the urban design improvements that we talked about with the site plan, what we think the building has achieved, especially with the Hampton Inn, we're no longer seeing the architectural thin brick, which just was determined that due to the additional costs and due to the need to probably articulate the site in a different way, full dimension brick is going to be a better end product. So that's what you see here on both facilities. Also a different mix of materials. And there is a new design professional that's on board. Obviously, we had a quality firm involved initially, but we think that the new firm that the developers brought along has just taken a look at the site in kind of a different way and brought a better interpretation to it in terms of how it will fit into the community. So overall...
Rita, on the green that's on the buildings now.
Yep.
I don't remember seeing green before. Is that actually going to be green?
It is. The proposal is for a color palette change as well as the grouping of materials and the type of materials. So the developer can explain why that's been a decision that he feels is more appropriate for the site. At the Urban Design Review Board, we did have some comments from a couple of the board members. It is different. I think in general, the developer is seeing it as preferential and something that's going to stand out in a positive way.
And that's on the Hampton Inn component?
Correct.
Rita, just for clarification also, I'm looking at the south elevation, Market Street looking north.
Yes.
Originally, it seemed that the design showed brick on the first level. Now I'm seeing what appears to be, I don't know, what some other kind of a product, but very little or no brick whatsoever on the first level of the Hampton Inn. Does look like there is some on the other extended stay product, but explain to me what the difference is.
I'll probably ask the developer, Ravi Patel with Hawkeye Hotels and Tony Baxter with Baxter Construction are both with us. They've been helping us narrate through why the changes have been presented as they are, because I think it's really more of a design perspective on the developer's part. We'll try to get those questions answered.
Mayor, members of the council, city manager, thanks again for having us here today. Yeah, I'll field any questions. I can answer your question first. I think your question was why the material on the first floor of the Hampton's been changed, correct?
I thought it was agreed upon that we were going to have brick on the first level.
Correct. Well, when we came back from urban design, we had changed it where it was thin brick except for the first floor, which was supposed to be full dimension brick. Now there is zero thin brick on the building. It's all full dimension brick. And the first floor, so we've gone through urban design twice already, and we'd originally came back in with what we thought a product that looked much better, more urban, which was a ledgestone product. Urban design had asked us to change the ledgestone project, so we brought a cast stone product, which is your full dimension brick would probably be about this big. The cast stone will probably be about that big. So I mean, it's pretty much full dimension brick now. So I mean, it's a pretty large brick that'll be placed along that first floor area there. So there's been quite a few changes that have happened. That's happened to the first floor. We just think aesthetically the entire building looks tenfold better than the last firm that we'd brought on board. If you have any further questions for that, I can definitely clarify.
Can I just follow up on your questions? And so the brick that, I guess it appears that that's actually brick. It looks more like a limestone product. Is that, or is it going to be painted?
It will not be painted. It'll be a cast stone.
Cast stone. So
yeah.
It kind of looks like a limestone. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
It looks kind of like a limestone.
Okay.
But it's not like a drive-it product.
No, it's not. It's a real stone brick product.
And so then the green, what is that?
That, I believe, is fiber cement board, fiber cement board.
Okay.
As we'd agreed, majority will be stone, masonry, brick, then fiber cement board, and very little EFS, which is where that Hampton Inn
And
sign
so
is.
the percentage of stone,
I believe it's
Right,
at the 75% that's required,
Okay.
right around there. So.
okay.
Any other questions?
It's higher.
Anybody?
It's higher than what's required.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Any other questions?
Anything? All right.
Tony Baxter's just reminded me of an important point that we want to make sure we bring to the council's attention. This has been a process where there's been a tremendous amount of adjacent neighborhood involvement, walking through the design, walking through how this product will be introduced. We've spent that time with the neighborhoods, again, through this redesign process, and they seem very excited about the new proposal. We'll continue to actively work with the neighborhoods and adjacent utilities, everybody that's going to configure into the solution as we bring the project forward. Just for kind of to try to be exact here, what we've got in front of us in terms of the landscaping that's depicted, sometimes you do get more generalities than specifics on these plans, and I think it's important to state for the council that we expect deciduous trees that are going to be in line. I'm kind of looking at Councilmember Moore. Mike Ludwig's made sure that we understand that that has to follow the guidelines and expectations of the city's existing site plan regs, so they will.
Mr. Manager, you have a comment?
Just to be clear, Mayor and Council and Rita and Ravi as well, there has been ongoing discussion about the power poles, and I know that you're working with Mid-Am to see if there's a way to treat that better than was originally proposed by burying the lines or the transformers or whatever might be worked out. And I understand that's still in play. Our goal, if I understand correctly, Rita, is for the staff to continue to work on that. If there are things that the city needs to do in that regard, we'll have to come back to you, Council, to ask your consent for that sort of thing. But the impression I've had in talking to folks is that this is a desirable thing to do, so we are trying to get that last piece of design issue resolved.
Correct.
I think we've all received emails about those utility poles and so forth. So just to clarify, we won't act on anything tonight, but you don't have the authority to do that until you come back to the council, so we'd be a part of that?
Mr. Coleman, council members, the issue is not resolved, so no, I don't believe you would be acting on that issue tonight. And we've talked about using a little-used technique that's available under urban renewal law that would provide some tax abatement during the construction period. We're not sure that's an appropriate tool, but if it is and it comes into play here, then we would be back before you to ask your permission on that point.
Mayor, is it okay if I ask the developer a quick question?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to make sure as we inch towards approving this tonight that you share our desire on the utility poles. And I mean, I don't want it any more than you do, or, you know, it'll all be shifted towards our responsibility. And can you make some kind of statement about
Sure, yeah, we definitely share the same sentiment that the neighbors do, and I believe the council does as well. I mean, it would be preferential for them to be buried for everybody. I mean, we definitely would rather see them buried if possible. It was just, it was a cost issue that it looks like the city manager and staff and the developer and possibly Brown Camp as well have tried to come to a conclusion on. We may be back before you, as the city manager stated, to potentially talk about the economics of that, but in terms of pure aesthetics, that we share the same sentiment as you do. We've had multiple meetings with city staff, Mid-American Energy, the neighborhoods, and anybody and everybody involved to try to come to a conclusion on that. And Tony, would you like to add anything to that? I mean, you've been more involved in those meetings than I have, so.
I can just I'm sorry, 20 Baxter Construction. I can just add that as of last Thursday, we met with staff in Mid-America at our job site, and we think we've come up with another proposal that we're going to be talking to you about that will probably, it's option 4. We've got 5 options out there. So we think option 4 is going to work to everybody's satisfaction, and the economics are probably as well going to work to everybody's satisfaction. We'll know that number tomorrow. Mid-America is working very hard to get us those costs, which are, if it works, is going to be far less than the numbers we've already been hearing.
I certainly think that bearing those is the most advantageous for the citizens and the neighbors down there, and I'd like to see that happen. But I also, just like I don't think that because there's a public benefit, it's not entirely your responsibility, I also don't think it's entirely the city's responsibility either.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, thank you. Right.
And timeline, Rita, for the project to begin and to actually, I know they've got the site cleared.
It's a site that's eager to get underway. I think these guys have set forward a very aggressive schedule to try to be open within middle summer of 2013.
Ooh.
And what we're excited about, I think, is our development agreement specifically says that we expect a second hotel to come online within 5 years. We're going to be able to, with the agenda that's been put forward, see it much sooner than that. So we're excited about that.
Let me add one thing to that. So depending on how quickly we can come to an agreement with the city and Mid-American Energy, that could push our schedule back a little bit. Currently, what we've got slated is if all falls into place, we'd like to have the it might turn out that the second hotel opens before the first hotel. So currently we've got financing in place for both properties. However, due to the construction methods of the Hampton Inn and the cement decks, that one might slow down because of winter conditions and us not being able to get off the ground as quickly as we'd first anticipated. There's been, multiple issues here. We had to over-excavate the entire site 10 feet and put re-engineered compacted fill down into it. There's, been other things such as going through Urban Design Review Board, also with this power line issue, and depending on how many weeks that takes, it could be pushed back. But Tony's done a great job for us. We just opened a residence inn in Coralville, Iowa, which was the quickest residence inn ever built. So I feel confident in his schedule that he's given us. And if all falls into place, we should have at least one hotel open by summer of 2013.
So is it realistic to think that we could have resolution of some type coming back at the September 10th?
That is realistic.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I think as you seek to improve your site, it's important that I think that we continue to look, as you have, I think, in a certain sense, to improving the whole neighborhood. And I think it's a key issue in regard to that power discussion we're having with Mid-Am, because I think that part of the issue here is that we're putting all the power then on the south side of the street and none on your property. And I think that we ought to, for the best interest of everybody in the neighborhood, try to come to a resolution on this and do it in a 21st century fashion as opposed to something that I think we've all looked at for at least the last 50 years. So thank you. I appreciate everybody's effort on that part. Anything else? All right, Robbie, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's open now for any other public comment. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to add to this discussion or would ask for clarification? Seeing none, thank you all for attending today, and for those that are so interested, we'll see you this evening at our Des Moines City Council meeting. Thank you.